I was standing in my kitchen yesterday morning watching honey drip from a spoon. It fell in a perfect spiral, not almost perfect, mathematically perfect. A logarithmic curve that followed an equation someone wrote down 300 years ago. The honey didn't know the equation. The spoon didn't calculate anything, but there it was. Reality obeying a formula that exists only in human minds. My hand froze midair because that's when it hit me. The most disturbing question in all of physics. Why does mathematics work at all? Not how does it work. Why does it work? Why does reality follow rules that we invented while sitting at desks, playing with symbols that don't exist anywhere in nature? You've been told mathematics is the language of the universe. Everyone says that. Your teachers said it, scientists say it, even I used to say it, but here's what nobody tells you. That statement makes no sense. None at all. Languages are invented by the species that speak them. The universe existed for 10 billion years before humans showed up and started writing equations. So whose language is it really? Think about what we're actually saying when we claim math describes reality. We're saying that scribbles we make on paper, symbols we invented, ideas that exist only in our heads, somehow control how galaxies spin, how atoms vibrate, how light bends around stars. We're saying reality is forced to obey our mental constructs. That's insane. It's like discovering that the universe runs on English grammar, or finding out that atoms follow recipes we write in cookbooks. It shouldn't work. It has no right to work, but it does. And not just sometimes, not just approximately. It works so perfectly that we can use mathematics to predict things that haven't happened yet, discover things we've never seen, and build things that shouldn't exist. I want you to really feel how strange this is. Imagine you're walking through a forest you've never visited before. You've never seen these trees, never touched this soil, but you pull out a notebook and write down some equations, just symbols, marks on paper, and those symbols tell you exactly how every branch will bend in the wind, how every leaf will fall, how every root will grow. Not because you measured the forest, because you did mathematics. Maxwell did this in 1865. He was playing with equations about electricity and magnetism, just manipulating symbols, moving terms around. And his equations told him that electromagnetic waves should exist. Nobody had ever seen them. Nobody had ever detected them. They were just a mathematical prediction. 20 years later, Hertz found them, radio waves, exactly where the math said they'd be. Dirac did it in 1928. His equation for the electron had an embarrassing problem. It predicted something that made no sense. Anti-electrons, particles with negative energy. Everyone thought it was a mathematical mistake. 4 years later, Anderson found them in cosmic rays, positrons, exactly as the mathematics demanded. Neptune was discovered with a pencil. Leverrier never looked through a telescope. He just noticed Uranus was wobbling wrong, did calculations, told astronomers to point their telescopes at specific coordinates. There it was, a planet nobody knew existed, found by mathematics alone. The Higgs boson, black holes, gravitational waves, all predicted by mathematics decades before technology could detect them. The math knew they were there before we did. This shouldn't be possible. Mathematics is something we made up. We invented numbers because we needed to count sheep. We invented geometry because we needed to measure fields. We invented calculus because we wanted to understand motion, These are human tools like hammers and wheels. But imagine if wheels could predict the future. Imagine if hammers knew secrets about distant galaxies. Here's what keeps me awake at night. There are only two possibilities, and both are terrifying. Either mathematics is a human invention that somehow forces the universe to obey it, which means we're wizards writing spells that reality has to follow, or mathematics exists independently of us, which means there's an invisible structure to reality, a hidden code that we're somehow able to read even though nobody taught us the language. Both options should be impossible. A few months ago, I taught my nephew about triangles. He's 7. I showed him that if you add up the angles, you always get 180 degrees. He tested it, cut out paper triangles, measured with his little protractor. 178 degrees, 182 degrees, close enough for a 7-year-old. But here's the thing that made my skin crawl. The triangle rule he was learning, that simple fact about 180 degrees, also governs how light bends around galaxies billions of light years away. The same rule, exactly. Not a similar rule, not an analogous rule, the identical mathematical relationship. How does a geometry rule we discovered by drawing in sand also control the shape of space-time around a black hole? Why does the Pythagorean theorem work on Earth and on planets in distant galaxies we'll never visit? Why do prime numbers, which we invented for counting, show up in the energy levels of uranium atoms? Why does pi, which comes from circles, appear in the equations for quantum mechanics, which has nothing to do with circles? The physicist Eugene Wigner called this the unreasonable effectiveness of mathematics. Unreasonable is being polite. It's miraculous. It's impossible. It's the greatest mystery nobody talks about. We've gotten so used to mathematics working that we've forgotten it shouldn't. We treat it like it's normal that reality obeys our equations, but there's nothing normal about it. It's the strangest thing in the universe, stranger than black holes, stranger than quantum mechanics, stranger than consciousness itself. Because at least with those mysteries, we're trying to understand things that exist. But with mathematics, we're facing something that shouldn't exist at all. A connection between human thought and physical reality that has no right to be there. Let me tell you about the day I stopped believing mathematics was human. I was teaching calculus, drawing curves on the board, and a student asked me something that shattered my comfortable assumptions. She said, "Professor, when Newton invented calculus, did he invent it or discover it?" I opened my mouth to answer, then I closed it because I realized I didn't know. Nobody knows. If Newton invented calculus, then why did Leibniz invent the exact same thing at the exact same time on a different continent? How do two people invent identical mathematics independently? It's like two authors writing the same novel word for word without ever meeting. But if Newton discovered calculus, that means it was already there, waiting. Where? Where exactly does an equation exist before someone writes it down? This question has been destroying philosophers for 2,000 years. Plato believed mathematical objects are real, more real than chairs and tables. He said there's a perfect circle that exists somewhere, and every circle we draw is just a shadow of that perfect form. A place where all mathematical truths live eternally, waiting to be discovered. That sounds like mysticism, but look at what happens when we assume Plato was wrong. If math is just a human invention, just patterns we imagine, then why does nature follow our imagination? When Einstein wrote down EMC2, was he forcing the universe to convert mass into energy? Of course not. The universe was doing that for billions of years before Einstein was born. The equation describes something that was already happening, but here's where it gets weird. The equation doesn't just describe mass-energy conversion, it predicts it. It tells us exactly how much energy comes from how much mass, down to ridiculous precision. The universe doesn't approximately follow our equation. It follows it exactly. Every atom, every star, every particle of light obeys EMC2 perfectly. How? I need you to understand how impossible this is. Imagine you invented a game. You made up the rules, wrote them down. Then you discovered that hurricanes follow your game rules, that volcanoes play by your made-up instructions, that DNA replicates according to the scoring system you invented for fun. You'd think you were going insane, but that's exactly what happened with mathematics. We invented it for counting sheep and measuring fields. Then we found out it controls everything from quarks to quasars. Here's an example that makes my brain hurt. In 1843, a mathematician named Hamilton invented something called quaternions, pure mathematics, abstract algebra, no connection to reality whatsoever. He was just playing with numbers that had 4 components instead of 2, completely useless. Mathematicians mocked him for wasting time on imaginary nonsense. 150 years later, quaternions became essential for computer graphics. Every video game you play uses quaternions to rotate objects in 3D space. But that's not the weird part. The weird part is that quaternions also describe how electrons spin, not approximately, exactly. The same mathematical structure Hamilton invented as a game perfectly describes a fundamental property of matter that he never knew existed. How did Hamilton's game predict electron spin? Here's another one. Around 300 BCE, Euclid proved there are infinitely many prime numbers. He wasn't solving a real problem. He was just curious about numbers that can't be divided evenly. Pure abstract thinking, completely disconnected from reality. 2,000 years later, we discovered that atoms vibrate at frequencies related to prime numbers. Cicadas emerge from the ground in prime number cycles. Crystal structures organize themselves according to prime number patterns. Why do cicadas care about prime numbers? They don't. But reality does. Prime numbers aren't things. You can't touch a prime number. You can't find one under a rock. They're concepts that exist only in minds that can think about division. But somehow these mental concepts control physical phenomena. This is the part where you should be uncomfortable, because I'm about to make it worse. Your brain runs on mathematics you don't understand. When you catch a ball, your neurons solve differential equations, not consciously. You can't feel it happening. But your brain calculates trajectories, adjusts for wind resistance, predicts intersection points. It does calculus in real time without you knowing what calculus is. A falcon diving for prey solves the same optimal control equations that NASA uses for rocket trajectories. The falcon doesn't know math, but its brain does. Bees navigate using vector calculus. Slime molds solve network optimization problems that humans need computers for. Plants arrange their leaves in Fibonacci spirals. None of them studied mathematics, but they all use it perfectly, which raises the most unsettling question of all. If mathematics exists in nature before humans discover it, if animals use math without knowing it, if reality itself is mathematical, then what are we? Are we math that became aware of itself? When you learn mathematics, you're not really learning something new. You're recognizing something your atoms already know. Your brain isn't acquiring external knowledge. It's remembering the rules it's made of. That time I watched honey spiral from the spoon, following its logarithmic curve. I wasn't seeing honey obey mathematics. I was seeing mathematics reveal itself through honey. The equation wasn't describing the spiral. The spiral was the equation written in honey instead of chalk. This is why mathematics feels true in a way nothing else does. When someone shows you that 2 plus 2, 4, you don't need evidence, you don't need experiments, you just know. It feels like remembering rather than learning. Because it is, you're made of particles that follow mathematical laws. Your thoughts are electrical patterns that obey mathematical rules. When you understand an equation, it's matter recognizing its own operating system, but that still doesn't answer the biggest question. Why this mathematics? That's the question that nobody asks. We've gotten so used to our mathematics working that we never wondered if different mathematics could work instead. But think about it. We use base 10 numbers because we have 10 fingers. We use the geometry we do because we evolved on a mostly flat surface. Our mathematics is shaped by the accidents of our evolution. So why does the universe care about the specific mathematics that emerged from primates on one particular planet? What if we had evolved with 8 fingers? Would physics suddenly use base 8? Of course not. The universe doesn't care how many fingers we have. Yet somehow the mathematics we developed with our 10 fingers perfectly describes phenomena we had no part in creating. Here's what really disturbs me. Mathematicians have invented different kinds of mathematics. Non-Euclidean geometry where parallel lines meet. Number systems where 2 plus 2 doesn't equal 4. Logics where statements can be both true and false simultaneously. These alternate mathematics are completely self-consistent. They work perfectly within their own rules, but the universe ignores them. Reality chose one specific type of mathematics to follow, our mathematics, the mathematics that humans happen to discover. Out of all the possible mathematical systems that could exist, the universe runs on the exact one that evolved in human brains. That's either the biggest coincidence in history or evidence of something we don't understand about the nature of existence. Last week I tried an experiment with my class. I asked them to invent a new mathematics. Make up any rules you want, I said, just be consistent. One student created a system where multiplication was non-commutative. In her math, 5 didn't equal 5 by 3. Another invented numbers that could be partially prime. A third designed geometry where circles had corners. All their systems were logically valid, but none of them described reality. You can't find non-commutative multiplication in nature. There are no partially prime atoms. Circles don't have corners, no matter what coordinate system you use. The universe is weirdly picky about which mathematics it allows, but here's the twist that changes everything. Sometimes the universe uses mathematics we thought was pure fantasy. For centuries, mathematicians played with imaginary numbers. Numbers that include the square root of -1, impossible numbers called imaginary because they can't exist, no physical meaning whatsoever. Then we discovered quantum mechanics. And the fundamental equation of quantum mechanics, the equation that describes every particle in the universe, requires imaginary numbers, not as a convenience, not as a shortcut, requires them. Without imaginary numbers, you can't describe reality at the quantum level. The universe is literally built on numbers we called imaginary because we thought they were impossible. It gets stranger. In the 1960s, physicists were trying to understand the strong nuclear force. The equations weren't working. Nothing matched experiments. Then someone noticed that if you assumed nature uses a very specific type of abstract algebra called SU3, symmetry, everything fell into place. SU3 was pure mathematics, invented by mathematicians who had never heard of the strong force. They were just exploring patterns in abstract space. But that exact pattern, that precise mathematical structure, turned out to be the blueprint for how quarks combine to form protons and neutrons. The universe was using mathematics that we invented before we knew what it was for. It's like finding out that crossword puzzles contain the cure for cancer, not as a metaphor, literally. The actual patterns in crossword puzzles somehow matching the molecular structure of medicine. 3 months ago, something happened that I still can't process. I was working through a problem about black hole thermodynamics, complex stuff, equations covering my entire whiteboard, and I noticed something that made me step back. The mathematics I was using to describe black holes was identical to mathematics used in computer science to describe information compression. Not similar, identical. The same equations. A black hole at the edge of the galaxy and a zip file on your computer follow the same mathematical rules. How is that possible? How can the mathematics of cosmic monsters crushing space-time be the same mathematics for making files smaller on your laptop? These phenomena have nothing in common. They exist at completely different scales. They operate through completely different mechanisms. Yet the mathematics is exactly the same. That's when I finally understood something. We've been asking the wrong question all along. We keep asking why mathematics describes reality. But that assumes mathematics and reality are two different things. What if they're not? What if mathematics isn't describing reality? What if mathematics is reality? What if what we call physical objects are just mathematical structures that we perceive as physical because that's the only way our brains can process them? When you touch a table, you're not really touching matter. You're interacting with a stable mathematical pattern. The electrons in your hand are repelled by the electrons in the table according to mathematical laws. The solidness you feel is mathematics. The weight, the texture, the temperature, all mathematics. We don't live in a universe described by mathematics. We live in mathematics itself. That honey spiraling from my spoon wasn't following a mathematical equation. It was a mathematical equation. The spiral wasn't shaped like math. The spiral was math, temporarily visible. You and I were not physical beings who happen to understand mathematics. We're mathematical patterns that evolved the ability to recognize other mathematical patterns. When you learn mathematics, you're not discovering external truth. You're recognizing your own nature. That's why mathematics feels different from any other knowledge. It's why mathematical truths feel eternal, necessary, undeniable. It's why we can use mathematics to predict things we've never seen. We're not imposing human ideas on nature. We're mathematics studying itself. But if this is true, if reality is mathematics, then the deepest question isn't why mathematics works. The deepest question is why mathematics exists at all. Why is there something mathematical rather than nothing? What breathes fire into the equations and makes them live? Why does mathematics become physics? Physics become chemistry. Chemistry become biology. And biology become conscious enough to ask these questions. I don't have answers to these questions. I'm not sure anyone ever will. But I know this. Every time you see a pattern in nature, a spiral in a shell, a hexagon in a honeycomb, a wave on water, you're seeing the universe reveal its true nature. You're seeing mathematics pretending to be physics. And when you understand even the simplest equation, when you grasp why 2 plus 2 equals 4 or why circles are round, you're not just learning about reality. Your reality learning about itself. The honey is still on my counter, still spiral perfect, still following mathematics it doesn't know it's following. Or maybe it does know. Maybe everything knows. Maybe knowing is what mathematics does when it becomes complex enough to fold back on itself. Maybe consciousness isn't something that emerged in the universe. Maybe it's what the universe is. Mathematical patterns, waking up. That's why mathematics controls reality. Because mathematics is reality. And reality, it turns out, is far stranger than we ever imagined possible.